Okay, it is the top of the hour and let's get started. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Luke Solomon, and I'll give a visual description. I am a white man with dark hair and brown eyes in the 5 o'clock shadow. I'm wearing a blue short-sleeved collared shirt with red dots, and I have a virtual background of an office space with the Getting Hired logo in green and blue text. I'm an account manager here and disability inclusion strategist with Getting Hired. And I'm hosting today's talk on ableism. We have a wonderful moderator and panel of leaders from top organizations all around the country that I'm very excited to introduce, who will be discussing today's topic on ableism. So before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to touch on some logistical items. Today's session is being recorded, and registrants to today's webinar will receive a recording just as soon as it's ready. The talk is set for 1 hour. ASL interpretation is being provided, as well as live captioning. That link can be found in the chat box here on Zoom, or if it's not there yet, it will just be there momentarily. And if you'd like to engage in the conversation or ask any questions, please feel free to do so with the chat functionality or in the Q&A section, which our team is going to be monitoring. Okay. So I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator, Patty Cisneros-Privo. Patty has always centered her work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Currently, she is the Diversity Inclusion Coordinator for the Wisconsin School of Business, spearheading all DE&I initiatives in the undergraduate program. Patty has won 4 National Wheelchair Basketball Association championships, while simultaneously becoming the first female head coach of a collegiate wheelchair basketball team with the University of Illinois. She is a 3-time Paralympian and was a member of the U.S. women's wheelchair basketball team for 10 years. So as a captain in 2008, she led Paralympic Team USA to its 2nd consecutive gold medal after winning gold in 2004. In January of 2021, she was appointed to the Congressional Commission on the State of the U.S. Olympics and Paralympics. And if all of that wasn't enough, she is publishing her first picture book in the spring of 2022, titled Tenacious: 15 Adventures Alongside Disabled Athletes. So Patty, thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled to have you and have you moderating this panel discussion. I will turn it over to you at this time.
All right, thank you, Luke. You're like my #1 hype man. That was awesome. Thank you, Getting Hired, for this great privilege of moderating this amazing panel. We have 3 amazing panelists, and we're so excited to just talk about ableism and our experiences. So like Luke said, my name is Patty Cisneros-Privo. I use pronouns she and her. I am the current Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Business. A visual description of myself, and we'd like to do this as just a good diversity, equity, and inclusion practice. I am a brown Mexican woman. I am also a wheelchair user. I have long, dark brown hair. I'm wearing black glasses, and I have some funky, dangly silver earrings. And I got to give a shout out to the amazing shirt that I was trying to fit into the screen, but I'm wearing a black shirt with white lettering that says Disability and Inclusion and Accessibility and Accommodations and Equality and Employment. I think it really speaks to what we want to leave you all with today. And like Luke said, I'm also a 2-time gold medalist in wheelchair basketball. So I'd love to introduce you all to our panelists. We'll start with Dan Cross. He is the Senior Manager for Talent Acquisition, Data, and Products at Capital One. We have Susan Katz, who's one of my besties, I gotta throw that in, who is the Human Resource Program Manager and Global Co-Chair of Accessibility at Biogen. And we have Sonia Rose, CX Privacy Specialist at Comcast. So before we begin, I just wanna share a quick and simple definition of ableism. Ableism is the discrimination and or prejudice against people with disabilities and or the devaluation of disability. There's many definitions of ableism, and we want to just give you a simple one to get started. I'm going to add another working definition by social justice engineer, educator, organizer, attorney, and artist Talila A. Lewis in the chat. It's a more comprehensive definition of ableism. And when you leave this panel, I hope that you dive into that definition as well. And simply put, ableism is an oppressive system, very much like racism and sexism. But unfortunately, it is widely and socially accepted. And I'm hoping that you'll come away wanting to help us dismantle ableism. So with all that, some of this may be uncomfortable for you. It may take some relearning of things that you thought were just okay to say or use or do. And I'm really challenging you today to lean into that learning, lean into that discomfort, because that's where, you know, we can really start dismantling ableism. Challenge yourself, be introspective, and be mindful of language. Luke is going to share a slide that we, as a moderator and the panelists, wanted to share with you all before we started our presentation. So here are some do's and don'ts. It's really important that you're mindful of language because, like I said, there are things that we say that we didn't realize were ableist. There's a lot of internalized ableism from society, from the medical system and so forth that we use on an everyday basis, but we don't understand that it has been used to attack people in our community and can be very harmful. So just quickly to go through the do's, do say disabled, accessible, disabled individual, non-apparent disabilities, wheelchair user, non-disabled individuals, deaf, hard of hearing, blind, blindness, and mental illness. And in sharing this slide, I also want to make note that it's best to always ask an individual how they want to identify. I am very much of the camp of using identity first language, but I understand that people may feel differently about that and may use person first language. So that's always like a best DEI practice. So without further ado, Luke, you can stop. Yeah, perfect. We'll jump into the questions and we're gonna start with Dan. Dan, describe who you are, what your connections are to disability, and what your career path has looked like, including any and all accolades and dedication to the disabled community.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Patty. And I'll just got to start. I'm incredibly excited to be here today. So as Patty mentioned, my name is Dan Cross. For a visual description, I'm a white Middle Eastern male. I have black hair and a blackish brown beard. I'm wearing a blue and purple checkered button-down shirt. And in my background here, there are gray walls with a brown couch, painting of an ocean wave, and behind my head is a little indoor basketball hoop. So my pronouns are he and him, and I'm disabled. My non-apparent disability is a few different sleeping disorders. Beyond my own disability, I have always been a lifelong ally and advocate for disability rights and disability employment. My mother was actually a teacher, and I had the opportunity to regularly join what was then referred to as her special education classroom. And she also just inspired me to get more involved with Special Olympics and a couple different groups. And I'm still a coach for Special Olympics to this day. So helping out with everything from basketball to bocce. I also spent a summer in college as a vocational rehabilitation specialist with Challenge Industries in Ithaca, New York. And that job coaching and employment assistance was just some of the most rewarding work of my career so far. And then after college, I joined Capital One. I've been here for almost 10 years now, or actually I just hit 10 years this summer. Crazy how time flies. And my current day job is leading our talent acquisition, data, and products team. I also am fortunate to serve as our national co-lead for the Capabilities Business Resource Group, our associate network for the disabled, people with disabilities, caregivers, and allies. I believe I'm gonna either turn it over to Patty again, or we can go right to Susan or Sonia, my awesome fellow panelists.
Yeah, let's kick it off to Susan. Thank you, Dan, for sharing that information. Susan, I'm going to repeat the question just really quickly. You know, describe who you are, what your connections are to disability, and what your career path looks like. or has looked like, and please include all your accolades as well.
Thank you, Patty. I am just really honored, actually, and excited to be here to be part of this panel. It's such an important conversation that we're not having most places. And so thank you all for joining us to participate. So I'm Susan Katz. I am a program manager in human resources at Biogen. I also serve as a global co-chair of Accessibility, which is our employee resource network for disabled employees, caregivers, and allies. My career path has been very winding. I spent a number of years in communications and then nonprofit work before originally moving into talent acquisition, which brought me to Biogen. My connection is that I am disabled myself. I am a full-time wheelchair user. I forgot to give my visual description. So I am a white woman with dark hair up in a bun. I am wearing the same t-shirt as Patty. You cannot see mine, but it has the same words. And my background has a white wall and a gray couch, a fake tree that's colored orange, and a painting of some flowers on the wall. Outside of my professional career, I am also a retired athlete. I am a two-time Paralympian and a Paralympic gold medalist in wheelchair basketball from the 2004 games with Patty. She was my teammate there. I then moved on to a totally unrelated athletic career in long distance triathlon and became one of the first female wheelchair athletes to complete an Ironman triathlon.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I can't believe it. That's great. Thank you, Susan, for sharing. And last but not least, Sonia, take it away.
Thank you, Patty. My name is Felia Rose. I am from Comcast. I've been at Comcast for 5 years. My physical description is I'm an African-American woman. I'm wearing the same shirt as Susan and Patty, even though you cannot see it. I have long brown, black hair, and my background is blurred. A little bit about me is I have a non-apparent disability. I have RSD and fibromyalgia. I currently am a co-lead on our My Abilities ERG at Comcast, and I am a liaison with our Accessibilities Committee as well. My passion centers around advocacy, not only because of my disability, but also because of my children's disability. My career path has been a little unorthodox. My day job is privacy, but what I normally do is advocacy and educational in regards to diversity and inclusion for disability at Comcast.
Thank you, Sonia. Didn't I tell you our panelists are just amazing people? Thank you all for sharing. We're going to get into it. So I'll start with you, Susan. Can you identify an example of ableism you've either experienced or witnessed? And this can be in the workplace, in the hiring process, or in life in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things, you're not only disabled at work or outside of work, right? So it's something that carries with you. And my experience is someone who has an apparent disability, which is going to be different, from others. So I get a lot of questions and people who feel they don't have boundaries or that they have a right to learn all kinds of private information about you because they might be curious, but it's, when someone says like, what's wrong with you? That's ableist, right? I don't know, what's wrong with you? One thing I think we promoted too is, people saying like, oh, I don't think of you as disabled. It's not really the compliment you think it is. For me, my disability identity is so critical. It's central to who I am. I'm really grateful for my disability. It's given me a lot of opportunity in life. So I don't want to be separated from it. Just like a smaller example of something related to like physical access. Sometimes when we were back in the office more regularly, going into a conference room and just the standard in the office being just overflowing with chairs. Well, that's blocking access. I have a service dog that comes with me to work every day, and to have to go into a conference room with your colleagues and people start getting flustered and wanting to move things for you, and just feeling like there's a little to do when all you want to do is be able to just go into the conference room and sit at the table like everyone else. So yeah, those are just a few examples that I've experienced.
Yeah, and I will add, like, sometimes those are the more obvious examples of ableism, like, where is the ramp? There are stairs here. There are a lot of chairs that I don't need. And Sonia, I think you can probably speak to a little bit more of the non-obvious forms of ableism that you've encountered in your life and workplace.
I sure can. My experience is a little different because my disability is not apparent. So the ableism I've experienced is because you can't see my disability, assuming that I don't have one. The biggest one I've gotten is to park in a disabled parking spot. I get out the car, I get approached, hey, you shouldn't be parking here, there's nothing wrong with you. And so educating people that to assume that my disability would be apparent is incorrect. Not everything that is a disability that would allow me to park there is going to be something that you can see, and I'm not obligated to self-identify or disclose either. So it's something that I am hoping people get more comfortable with not assuming.
Absolutely. And that's such a good point about you're not obligated to disclose this information to them. And I really like, you know, that last piece, Sonia, with you saying, hopefully people come away and learn, because that's how we have to address it and others have to address it. So Dan, I'll kick it off to you as well. Like, what are some examples you faced in the workplace, in your life, when it comes to ableism?
Sure. So similarly, I shared in my introduction that I have a non-apparent disability, and I've always heard this type of disability described as invisible. And I even use that term for myself often. That terminology and language is ableism, right? So invisible comes from the perspective of how others see me or how they see my disability and those types of disabilities more generally. And I'll tell you, for me, my disability is very visible. It impacts me every day, and it's something that can really impact how I show up for others each day. So that's one thing around like the language, and kind of the other aspect of ableism that I've been dealing with is internalizing and kind of coming to terms with my own disability and how I share that with others. And because my disability is not apparent, I can typically manage and because I can typically manage and accommodate my disability in the privacy of my home, I have more of a choice about whether I self-identify through the hiring process, at my company, at events, and so on. And you know, when I do disclose or share my disability, I'm sometimes battling my own imposter syndrome because of comments I've received like, is that really a disability? Or you don't seem disabled at all. And so I've questioned for myself whether or not I should share that I'm disabled, and fear that I might not be disabled enough in the eyes of the public or my disabled peers who might have an apparent disability or something that impacts them more profoundly. And so if you can't tell, I think language and battling ableist language really is important. And that's why I'm so glad we're here having this panel discussion today.
Yeah, and I'm going to echo what Susan wrote in the chat. Thank you, all three of you, for being very vulnerable and sharing your personal experiences in hopes that we can educate others moving forward. And Dan, to your point about a lot of internalized ableism, you know, I think all four of us will agree that we've used a lot of ableist language and didn't even know. Dan, to your point about invisible. And so my challenge to you all in the audience is really think about the language you're using, and if it has the impact is the intent that you want. And it's okay if you've used it in the past, because you don't know what you don't know, but moving forward, it's really important to be mindful of language. Which takes us into our third question. I'm going to start with you, Dan. How, as employers invested in the disabled community, can we engage allyship and remove the burden from only people with disabilities to help dismantle ableism?
Yeah, this is a great question. So as employers, it's really no surprise that education and awareness are really critical ways to better engage allies. So I'll mention an example. At Capital One, we have multiple allyship programs that really span across our different business resource groups that rally around race and gender identities and more generally try to tackle unconscious bias. And for capabilities, which is for the disabled and people with disabilities, we have some great reference material in the form of slides that help drive that education and awareness for our non-disabled allies. And so I think that's been great. However, what I think has been most helpful is we're making sure that that awareness is integrated into each and every event we do. It's not just a awareness training. It's not just a formalized resource reference training materials. It's also before, during, and after all of our events, whether it be speaker series, fireside chats, volunteerism events in the community. Really important to bring context and awareness into the type of disability we're supporting or the broader group in general. And so I think really making sure you're bringing that education awareness into everything we do is really an important way to engage those allies.
Absolutely, and that's such a great comprehensive answer. Thank you, Dan. I'm going to kick it off to you, Sonia. Same question. As employers invested in the disabled community, how can we engage allyship and remove the burden of just putting it on us, like the people in the disabled community?
Well, I want to echo Dan. Here at Comcast, we do a lot of the same things surrounded around our ERG groups and inclusion. And letting everyone know, just because you're not necessarily identifying with this group, that you're more than welcome to join. And this is a safe space to ask those hard questions and have those hard conversations. As employers, we're looking to normalize things that help you do your job well, from the hiring process, onboarding, into your day-to-day, where if you need something that coincides with your disability that you're not forced to self-identify, that getting those tools and things is just like getting a Post-it note, so that it's normalized. It's not something that you have to jump through hoops to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think, and both to yours and Dan's point about like, it should be an everyday active work movement. It shouldn't be like the one-off, let's talk about ableism and that's it. And so Susan, we'll close out this question to you, and then I'm going to follow up directly after with the next question.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, and piggybacking off of what Sonia and Dan said about, quote unquote, normalizing these things, both in the workplace and in life. When things are made accessible, it's not just a benefit to the disabled person or to the disabled community. It's almost always a benefit to everyone, right? So you're not just implementing, programs or processes or whatever that's like just to accommodate your disabled employees. It's to accommodate all your employees. And it will be a benefit to everyone. But I'm just going to go back to what Dan said about education, right? It's all about education and awareness. There was a lot of conversation last summer around the social unrest around race, about how it's not the responsibility, of the person of color to educate or to educate white people about race and what it's like, right? It's really the same with disability. The burden is not mine to teach you. There are a lot of resources. And so as employers, right, part of what we're doing is not just hiring, but building up the awareness and inclusion and the culture within our companies. And so that's a big part of our responsibility as well, to help provide resources and education.
Thank you, Susan. And that's like the perfect segue to the question. So that's why I wanted you to piggyback. But, in a self-plug and talking about your organization a little bit further, talk about some of the initiatives that have helped remove some of the stigma around disability. I know that Biogen and someone else, I can't remember who started the campaign, but the big say the word campaign is big at Biogen. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're not going to take credit for it. There was a movement and a hashtag that originated from within the disabled community by an activist named Lawrence Carter Long. That was hashtag say the word. It was really about reclaiming the word disabled, right? We are disabled. It's part of our identity. We don't want to be afraid to say that. We're not ashamed. Disability is not a negative. So we don't want to use euphemisms like differently abled or, physically challenged. I mean, I did an Ironman. I don't feel that physically challenged, right? So we just want to stay disabled. So we've leveraged this this movement and this campaign as like the foundation of all of our messaging at Biogen this year through the Accessibility Employee Resource Network. And I am so proud and happy and excited about how our employees and our entire team at Biogen have embraced this. You know, we've held several different, speaker events, providing different resources for people. And I'm already seeing the change. We had someone from our communications team reach out to say, we're putting out requests for proposal for a digital project, and we're ensuring that any company who receives, the bid includes web accessibility standards, as part of what they do. That doesn't seem, maybe not seem that big, but it's huge, right? It's such a big step. I also had a colleague reach out that they include some kind of advice column in the newsletter within their business unit. They wanted to, talk about disability. And I appreciated her vulnerability, because she came to me, and what she proposed to go in that advice column, was kind of telling employees to say to their disabled coworkers, tell me about your disability, which we really want to steer that conversation to what is your lived experience as a disabled person. But I don't think those conversations would have happened, or we've been able to talk about those things without, some of the work we've been doing this year. And just like I said, the amazing reception we've gotten from our employees. So it really is about being vulnerable and opening up and providing people the platform, right, to ask the questions.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, like, just to piggyback on that a little bit, we're not perfect. I'm in the DEI space, and I'm getting it wrong constantly. I try, and I'm introspective, and I reach out so that, somebody from a marginalized identity isn't teaching me, but I'm doing the work. I think that's important, especially with this panel as well. You three are so, humbly welcoming to teach others, or at least give people some footing about ableism. But I think the most important thing after this is what you do to learn more and continue that work. So Dan, back to you. Talk a little bit about your organization, Capital One, and some of the initiatives that you all have done to remove that stigma around disability.
Yeah, so we've done a lot. I mentioned already the allyship programs, which I think are really important. I'll say one of the other things I'm just incredibly proud of is our group. It's our mental health connection group. It's called, we internally call it Gray Matter. And I've been so impressed with how we've been really trying to call out and understand that stigma around mental health, particularly in the workplace, but really across life in general, right? And we've done some tremendous events. And one thing I've been really impressed with, how our leaders have jumped on board and really been open and vulnerable about their own mental health, and at times when it's impacted their careers or how it's impacting them right now with everything happening. And so that has been such a great thing to see at Capital One and through our work.
That's great. And Emily has given you a shout out, Dan, in the chat. So thank you, Emily, for engaging in the chat. There's great questions popping in the chat. Please continue to use that feature. We hope to provide some time at the end to answer some of these questions. And if we don't, get hired, we'll definitely follow up with some responses. Sonia, to close out this question, at Comcast, what are some of the initiatives that you all have taken to remove this stigma around disability and the word disabled?
One of the big things that we've done has definitely added a bolster of material in regards to training, specifically focused on like our leaders, looking at how do we maximize our employee experience for those that are neurodivergent, how do we leverage those abilities that they have to make them as successful as possible in the workplace, and not necessarily considering it a detractor, but something that's a positive that we can definitely encourage. Another thing we're doing is we do a fireside chat. We had one with Claudia Gordon, and that was amazing that we did in May. Really having those hard conversations that we're having here today and normalizing the questions and being open to the answers and learning. It's been a wealth of experience and knowledge that's come, and I think everyone's benefited from it. And the way that we do business virtually and as a team has improved tenfold. I think COVID has definitely made it a better situation for us as a whole. Making sure that we have ASL interpreters when we're doing meetings or closed captions and stuff, and making sure that we're all inclusive for everyone. And I think businesses before in person, that was sometimes an afterthought when you were in the office, but now it's at the forefront. So we're proud to be one of the companies that are doing it and doing it well.
Yeah, and I want to just echo that, Sonia. Kudos to Comcast, Biogen, and Capital One for being here, having these tough conversations. You know, it's uncomfortable when you realize you've been doing something that has been harmful, you know, and it's uncomfortable to want to learn how to change that. And because the three companies, you know, Biogen, Comcast, Capital One, they have incredible representatives in U3 and are here able to speak on your own vulnerable personal experiences and helping dismantle, you know, ableist language, ableist culture is just so great. So thank you three for sharing that. We're doing like awesome on time. I'm so happy. I thought we were gonna have to like speed things up, but you know, just to our last question, I think it's important to always end with a call to action. When I give presentations in my own DEI professional circle, I always have somebody, or I have the participants like take out a Post-it note and write something down that you're going to do. You know, statistically, if you don't do it in that moment, you're not going to do it by so much percentage. I don't know what it is. But if you're able to, and you can write some notes down, type it into your phone notes, whatever. But it's important that we take it one step further. I think a lot of times, and Susan kind of touched on this earlier, you know, with talks around diversity, equity, and inclusion, the big bulk comes from you doing the work. We're giving you like the foundation, but it's important that you don't rely on disabled people to teach you about ableism. We've given you sort of that foundation. Now it's for you to like be actively engaged in your own work. And this is a great, another great stepping stone that these three panelists will give you. So call to action, what is the number one tip you would suggest to the audience in helping to dismantle ableism? And I'm going to start with you, Sonia.
I think for me, the biggest thing is that you don't assume. Like we shouldn't assume. I know everyone has a background that gives you some guidance as to your thought process as how the world works. But I think a big part of dismantling this is to not assume. Not everything is going to be apparent. And we have to be empathetic and be willing to learn and understand other people's perspectives and life experiences. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, inside of work, outside of work, it makes a world of a difference, just that understanding and willingness to learn.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic answer. Thank you, Sonia. Susan, what about you? What's that call to action that you have for our audience members?
Yeah, mine I think is directed a little bit more to employers, but really kind of fits anywhere. Put disabled employees at the center of your efforts. You know, we need to be at the table. There's a common refrain in the disabled community, nothing about us without us. For so long, people have been speaking on our behalf at some of these tables because we've never had the opportunity to be there. And so for Dan and Sonia and I to be able to be at the center of these efforts is a significant reason why our companies are able to advance, you know, our initiatives and our disability inclusion. I mean, that's just the number one thing, because we can talk about hiring and we all want to hire more disabled candidates. but we also want them to have the inclusive and welcoming and understanding culture, once they get here.
Yes, that is so important. I always talk about, like, if you want diversity, you don't just bring in like a wheelchair user or a Black individual into a room that has no education, no training on the culture, climate, some of that pre-training. So that's very important, Susan. Thank you for sharing that. And we're going to end with you, Dan. Call to action. What do you want to tell our audience members?
Yeah, I'll say I love both of those answers. So do one, if not both of those. I'll give one too, but love those. And I think one of the most important thing is just being courageous enough to take any first step. So any action here is great. And then, for something more specific, I'll connect it to my day job in talent acquisition or recruiting, and specifically for employers and anyone in HR or in a recruiting role, or if you make hires and lead a team, manage people. My call to action is really to really evaluate every step of the hiring and selection process for your candidates, and really going beyond just digital accessibility and making sure your application is compliant. Really try to go a step further and understand that candidate experience. Ask yourself those questions, like what does the candidate accommodations process look like? What experience do candidates have there? How long are they waiting to hear back from the accommodations team? Things like that. What could make that process better? Those are just all those questions you should be continually reviewing and auditing in your hiring and recruiting process to hopefully open up a more accessible path for employment at your company. And so really, I think thinking about what that looks like for candidates is really my first call to action when I think of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing. And thank you, three panelists. You have been fantastic. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat, and I think, this is a great opportunity. Again, the foundation for many of you in the audience to learn more and to be active in this work in dismantling ableism. And my call to action is just that, like, don't leave just with this presentation, like, oh, great, this is a one-off. I learned a little bit about ableism and that's it. Really be active and intentional in the work. And it's important because, again, ableism is an oppressive system. The disabled community, disabled individuals have been oppressed for years and have had language used against them that has been harmful and has attacked them. And so I'm gonna hone in on the language piece. I think call to action, be mindful of the language you use. We shared that slide at the beginning just to kind of set a practice of what we want to use as role models as disabled individuals ourselves. But I think it's important to think about the language that we have commonly normalized and challenge yourself not to use that language. And I'll give you a perfect example. The word crazy. Think about how often people use that word just in everyday language as another adjective, as something that's kind of cool and, off the hook. But this word has been used to attack and harm the disabled community in the past. And we have now members of the disabled community asking people like, hey, this is ableist language. This was used to harm our people back in the day. Let's refrain from using that word. Let's change it up. And I will tell you, I get extreme pushback with that word from family, from friends, because we've normalized it. And it's so socially accepted to use a word that has attacked the disabled community. And, we see this also with racial groups and racial slurs that were used in the past that we no longer use. So it's really similar to that. And that would be my call to action. Be mindful of your language. We could spend all day giving you resources, putting in links in the chat, but this is where you need to do the work. Don't rely on disabled individuals to teach you about ableism. This is where you have to take this foundation and then move forward. So with that, thank you, Susan, Sonia, and Dan. You three are incredible, incredible individuals, and I am so honored to share the screen with you. I think Luke's gonna jump back in here and we'll go through some Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. This has just been fantastic. The chat has been excellent, and there's been some real VIPs in there, just really cheering everybody on. So I'm always thrilled to see that. But yeah, we've had some questions come through, and I'll read some of these off, and we can, if you feel comfortable just hopping on, just go ahead. So there are a couple of questions kind of surrounding this general idea, maybe. So the question is this: like, in the workplace, do you have suggestions on how to correct someone who's using ableist language? And there's another similar type of question where it kind of surrounds around the topic of, oh, maybe my organization is, not that very far along in our disability inclusion journey. I talk to all sorts of clients, some who are, just really just doing all the right things and really just kind of setting an example, and others that are maybe just starting out and just starting that learning process. But, if you are encountering someone who's maybe using some of this language, as an ally, or anything, how would you combat that in a kind of professional setting?
I'm actually going to throw this to Patty because she has such a great example. But, I just compare, if you heard a colleague or a coworker use terminology that was racist or sexist or homophobic, like, how would you address that? It's really not any different if someone's using ableist language. I think part of what makes it more challenging is that it is more normalized, right? We do it so much, myself included, right? I have to be very aware, of what I'm saying as well. But it's really no different. But I know Patty has a really great example of this.
Yeah, it's funny. So I thank you, Susan. Actually, when Luke was reading that, I was like, oh, Susan can answer this one well. But I was working with someone in the School of Business who is like ahead of me by a few titles, and referred to me as wheelchair bound. And I was like, oh, I'm not bound to my wheelchair. That's such like outdated language that we continue to use. And for all of those of you out there, it's wheelchair user or person who uses a wheelchair. And I really like struggled in that moment on like calling this person out, because one, there's like a power dynamic, but also two, I mean, these are uncomfortable conversations. I know Sonia touched on this earlier, and like, it's really the discomfort where we start to learn. So I just said, actually, I prefer to use the word wheelchair user. Wheelchair bound is outdated, and within the disabled community, we prefer to continue to use wheelchair user or person that uses a wheelchair. And the person was so like gracious, apologetic, obviously, but was thankful and grateful that I kind of took that moment to educate. I wasn't trying to put this person on the spot and call them out. And I think that's important for all of us. Like, we're not trying to get you in a gotcha moment. It's more so like for the greater good. Let's educate. Let's all help each other dismantle ableism and, really specifically ableist language.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, we talk about that when as getting hired as a company, when we deliver like disability etiquette trainings. It's like, these things aren't necessarily meant to be like a rule book or a logbook, but more about just setting an example, just because you never know, like even just joking about yesterday, like we were in preparation for this webinar, like some of the things that we were talking about presenting on that first slide were incorrect, right? It's like it's okay, but just like you said, lean into the process. Just things are always changing. You're going to make mistakes no matter where you are. I think it's just the important thing is just to kind of learn and adapt from there.
Luke, I just want to circle back to the second part of the question about maybe your company is at the early stages of its disability inclusion journey. Put disabled people at the center of your efforts. I said it before, but Biogen had laid some great foundation. But when myself and my other co-chair took up the helm of our Disability Employee Resource Network, from our understanding, we're the first 2 disabled employees to head up the network. And I just think it allows you to make much more leaps and bounds when you have that voice at the table. So yeah, start there, engage your disabled employees.
Awesome. Awesome. Absolutely. Okay. Another question here in the chat. And yeah, I guess any one of you can speak to this. Can we dive into ways that ableism may show up throughout the hiring process? I mean, we talk about this a lot. We're in the DE&I space, so it's part of our regular conversation. But maybe if we can just kind of zoom in the lens there, maybe talk about some specific examples maybe you've seen, or maybe something that you've learned along the way in your journey throughout talent acquisition. That would be helpful.
I'd love to talk about this one. I actually, we did a project working and centering around recruiting more individuals with disabilities. And one of the big things that came up is when you look at some of the recruiters' paperwork, there would be notes of like, oh, this person didn't seem to be involved in the interview process. They weren't making eye contact, things like that. When you have individuals that are neurodivergent, specifically if they are on the autism spectrum, it can be very difficult for them to maintain that eye contact, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not engaged in the conversation. And so that's like a normal kind of assumption, like, hey, it seemed like they didn't want to be here, when that wasn't necessarily the case, but they didn't understand the disability. So it's that education piece, like, hey, ask probing questions. They may not carry the conversation the way a neurotypical person would. However, if you do engage and ask the right questions, you'll learn that, yes, they were listening and they're actually a very good fit for this position. So it's changing the way we hire, in essence.
Yeah, that's a great example. Go ahead, Betty.
Nope, you go ahead, Dan.
I was just gonna kind of add on an example and why my call to action is to audit your recruiting process and take a look at it, because I'm not gonna name drop companies and stuff, but we were a part of a broader kind of research effort, and we were trading kind of best practices on some of the accommodation process for candidates. And as I think a lot of you know, it's a crazy hiring cycle time right now, and speed is everything. And I think this was a few years ago, so not updated, but I think the average time a candidate was sitting there waiting for the right accommodation in the process was 4 to 5 weeks, right? So they're sitting in a step, no action is being taken on their candidacy and kind of moving them forward. In that 4 to 5 weeks, guess what? More than likely, that position was being filled by someone else. Their resume was then on file for a new role. How many times do you then hear back out? So really making sure you understand your company's process and really self-advocating for yourself if you're disabled and require that accommodation, and really working with them, knocking down those doors to hear those updates and provide some suggestions or different ways you can have that accommodation is really key too.
Yeah, I would, having spent more time in talent acquisition than I have in my current role. This kind of relates back to something I said earlier about, accessibility and accommodations really being a benefit to everyone. Offer your accommodation practices, your statement, bring up accommodations with every single candidate. That's not something that should be reserved for, oh, I think this candidate might be disabled, right? Or like, oh, I can see that they are. Just make it a standard part of your process that you cover accommodations, and then everybody's covered.
And I just want to add one thing. I was trying to get my mouse over the unmute button. I think many people, and myself included, we have so much internalized ableism that sometimes we don't want to ask for accommodations, like, oh, no, I can open a door. It's fine. I can do it. I don't need a push handle. And I had a really great conversation with a disability activist who's actually on the call. Her name's Karen Korb, about like, it's not just about you, it's about all the disabled individuals that come after you that might need that accommodation. So, one, we have to like really look at ourselves and the internalized ableism we've been fed, for however long. In fact, today is my 25th wheelchair anniversary. So it's kind of like full circle for me today. And over these years, I mean, just through the medical system and our society, just all the internalized ableism I've been fed throughout the years. And, you know, it's 25 years later, and this is the first year I've ever asked for accommodations. I mean, I'm embarrassed, but part of it is a lot of the internalized ableism that we have to dismantle within ourselves. And the way we can do that is by asking for accommodations for ourselves, but for the people that come after us.
Awesome. Awesome. Fantastic examples across the board. Everybody, thank you for participating in that question for sure. That's a good one. There's one question that popped up in the chat that I'm going to save for the end for us to answer, or for myself to answer. But there's another one I wanted to pass along to the panel here. Question is this: I've been able to pass as non-disabled, you know, at this point, like, how can I now disclose a disability? And this kind of maybe speaks to, you know, the vulnerability of this panel. You know, it's, you know, there are lots of people that are comfortable talking about their process and others that are not so much. And that's important to understand. But in this circumstance with this specific question, does anybody on the panel maybe have any tips or maybe just some you know, just advice to pass along to this person?
I actually went through this process with myself and with my husband, who's also disabled. We were always taught you don't disclose. It's better to not disclose to get the job than to disclose. So tearing down those walls and having those conversations and sitting down with my boss and saying, hey, I do have a disability. I've been masking for a very long time. This is what I need to be successful, and being allowed to do that. It takes a lot of courage. I think you definitely want to have a support person. If you have a employee resource group that can help you navigate that process, that would probably be a good place to start, I would recommend, because it is very hard at first. And so having someone that's already done it by your side can help in the process.
Could not say that any better. Thanks, Anya.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, we touched on this on like question 3, but like allyship, you know, find somebody in your organization, in your business, who you feel comfortable disclosing, and, you know, have a team with you to go that next step, whether that's to your supervisor, to HR, to whatever. But it's important that we have community and build those allies within.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question, Sonia? Because I obviously can't speak to this experience myself, but have heard from others who've been through it. How did it help you? What opened up for you when you did disclose? What was the benefit?
Everything. I sat in a customer service job that I was not necessarily ecstatic about for a long time because of my disability. And once I disclosed and got the help that I needed, I was able to not only help myself, but others in our department that were like, hey, I never knew about these things. How come no one told us? How do we access them? How do we use them to get to where I am now? And I'm literally leading projects in how we hire, how we train, how our leadership coaches those with disabilities, how to make the accommodation faster. Like I said, anyone asking for those things, it shouldn't take 4, 5, 6 weeks to get them. It should be as easy as 1, 2, 3. We should all know how to access them very quickly.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Similar, but I think, you know, people who haven't heard that or are concerned or, you know, afraid, honestly, to you know, to disclose, it's great to hear stories like that.
No problem. My pleasure.
One thing I'll add, and I'll bring it back to Capital One and something amazing that kind of happened across some of our business resource groups, is the connection we had with our LGBTQIA+ group out front around coming out, and how that's very similar for coming out with a disability, and like coming out in that community too, which was fascinating, right? And then hearing the different stories about the relief, the rights, different ways they can connect to resources, and that getting that feeling of needing to mask all the time off of them. And so that's really how I felt in a lot of ways. I was able to open up to some different accommodations and things like that, that better helped me manage it. And also internally gave me the space to say, it's okay if I'm feeling down or tired or whatever else today because of my disability, or just because that's how I was feeling, and me being okay with that for myself was really important too.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to take a question here that popped up in the chat real quick. The question is this: are there any job or recruiting platforms specific for disabled individuals? And yes, there are a lot of them, and Getting Hired is one of them. All these lovely panelists that have been so gracious to lend their time today are all employer partners of Getting Hired. And one of the backbones of our company is a job board, basically trying to bridge the gap in between inclusive hiring employers and people with disabilities. So this is something that we've been doing as a company since 2008. You know, a lot of our services have evolved over the years, but that is one, you know, steadfast thing that we've kept all along the way. So yes, gettinghired.com is a job board specifically for that purpose. And you can feel free to check that out. If you have any questions about that, you feel free to reach out on the contact us form. We're getting close here to the end of our time, and you know there are. I think we hit most of the questions here in the Q&A section.
Should we go back to the question that you're holding?
No, that was the one.
A question? Oh, that was the one.
That was the one. It was all about getting hired. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to be downloading the chat. And if there are any other questions that we missed, this chat has been kind of hard to follow. Thank you so much for your engagement in the chat. And if there was something that we missed, we'll reach out to you for that week so we can have some follow-up. For all of our employer partners attending, please feel free to reach out to your Getting Hired contact if you have any kind of follow-up that you'd like to discuss with us, or on our website if you don't have a specific contact. I want to thank all of you for participating. Susan, Sonia, Dan, Patty. I think I speak for everybody in here. I've been getting chats and seeing things about chills, things popping up, little hand clap emojis, all the things. So I think this is really resonating, and we've talked about it at length, how important this topic is, how it doesn't stop here. So we encourage everyone to continue that education piece. Don't just stop with one webinar with just 4 very vulnerable people. Just kind of continue it. And it's uncomfortable, but leading in is really where all that growth happens. I think you said it best, Patty. So I'm
gonna just turn it around quickly and thank you, Luke, and Lauren at Getting Hired for being really amazing partners. This topic and the idea of a panel discussion on ableism kind of came up between Luke and I one day, and I just appreciate your willingness to take on and open up this conversation and being able to make it something bigger, and leveraging other amazing partners like Capital One and Comcast. So these conversations aren't easy, they're not happening a lot of places, and we really appreciate your efforts in advancing disability inclusion and rights.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate it. And yes, big shout out to Lauren behind the scenes, who facilitated much of this event and who's not on the screen with us. So yeah, if you were registered for this webinar today, you will receive a recording of it just as soon as it's ready. Please feel to reach out to your Getting Hired contact with any sort of follow-up. We'll go through the chat and make sure that any questions that were not answered, we'll reach out to you. But again, Patty, Susan, Sonia, Dan, you all have been wonderful, moderator and panelists for this. We thank you so much for your time and your vulnerability in talking about this and being great employer partners to Getting Hired. Thank you to Chanel and Laura, our interpreters and our live captioner today. This brings us to the end of our webinar. So thank you everybody for joining and for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.